Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk, you wanna talk.
Another half hour to spend with our friend Dr. Alan Keyes, Police Chief, or former Police Chief Steve Davis, and me, Stan Solomon. I'm going to talk about Tanya Reeves. It won't be a long conversation because you see, Tanya's dead. Tanya went into Planned Parenthood in Chicago to kill her child. And her child was killed. Tragically. Equally tragically, she was killed. Planned Parenthood is saying, oh, it was an accident. No, it wasn't an accident. It was absolutely diabolically on purpose that they convinced Tanya and millions of other women that it is okay to kill your own child. And that's what you're doing, killing your child. And that if, in fact, you get killed in the process, and that does happen, not very often, that it's an accident. And of course, they took her as she was dying to a hospital, and the hospital said, oh, it was an accident. Now, here's the fact, folk. The number of abortions being done in America has gone down slightly. Two of every 3 children, black children conceived in America, is murdered on purpose by racists. They happen to be black racists and white racists, but racists that want black children murdered. And they've been wildly successful. It's not the Ku Klux Klan. It's the Democrat Party. It's liberals. It's the godless. It's the deviant. It's the Satan worshipers, whoever they are. The reality is that Tanya is dead because she bought into the evil but wrong fact that it's okay to kill your child. Dr. Keyes.
Stan, it's one of those sad facts that this Holocaust, which has had, as you say, a particularly devastating impact on the black community, continues to be portrayed by the folks who advocate it. And again, we need to keep in mind that when I say that, everybody said, well, he means that nasty, bad old Obama character, and I sure do. And I laid myself on the line at great cost to make the point and to bear witness against the wicked, deep-dyed radicalism with which this man advocated abortion, up to and including the murder of fully born infant children set aside to die because even though they could be safe, their mothers wanted them aborted, and so you just wrap them up in dirty linen and let them die. That's the mentality. That's the hardness of heart that is cultivated by this whole pro-abortion, abortion so-called rights mentality. And I think it just breaks my heart when I consider the fact that after all the struggle that people went through in order to remove the burdens of slavery and discrimination and Jim Crow, Margaret Sanger and her ilk were able successfully to put in place an apparatus of extermination that actually unleashed a principle that turned the will of folks in the black community against their own posterity. But before anybody else takes comfort in the fact that, oh, it's the folks in the black community or something, well, I hate to tell you this, but the same thing has been perpetrated throughout our society now. And it's probably contributing to the reality that we're joining Europe amongst the populations, that if it weren't for immigration, illegal and legal, our population would decline. We're starting to pass that tipping point, which signifies that a people has withdrawn confidence in its behavior, at least, from its own future. And final point, Stan, which I can't help but noting, in the course of the past week, I read a report of an interview that was done by Justice Scalia. Now, I know Justice Scalia is often portrayed as one of those solid bedrock conservatives, but I always remind people when I talk to them about these deep moral issues that, in fact, Justice Scalia is not someone who adopts in principle the understanding of our Constitution that requires respect for unalienable rights as the bedrock principle of constitutional self-government. That's what the founders believed. That's what they said in the Declaration. That's what they implemented. And that's what is clear, by the way, in the Constitution itself, and I'll talk to that in a second. But in this interview, Justice Scalia basically said, when he was asked why it was that he was so fanatically committed to the position against abortion, he said, well, I'm not fanatically committed. I don't believe in abortion. But he said, I also don't believe that it's a constitutional matter, that it should be decided by the courts. It should be left, he said, to democracy to decide. So that folks in the states can, vote abortion up or vote it down. He doesn't care. Just as Stephen Douglas said about slavery in the 19th century, so Justice Scalia says about abortion in the 20th century, that it's a matter of popular sovereignty. Well, I beg to differ. And not only do I beg to differ, but I think that there are many, many scores of thousands of Americans who went out onto battlefields and died in order to vindicate the principle that there are fundamental premises of right and wrong, beginning with the premise that we are all created equal and endowed not by government or by constitutions, but by our Creator God with our unalienable rights. And that among these is the unalienable right to life. And when Scalia says, well, that's not in the Constitution, that's in the Declaration, and I'll say the Constitution cannot be understood apart from the Declaration, because the claim of the people to govern themselves cannot be understood apart from the Declaration, and the Constitution implements that claim. That's an argument, by the way, that the founders themselves made in the Federalist paper and elsewhere. Why people like Scalia are discarding it now is pretty clear, because they want to discard the premise of creation, pretend that this phony principle of separation of church and state that they invented, at least in the form it's applied these days, requires that we turn away from God. It's all a lie. But he takes the stand. And he takes a stand, therefore, that then ends up ignoring. The folks on the Supreme Court have been quite willing to acknowledge that the document has to be interpreted in light of the purposes which the American people articulate in the preamble, and they've done it themselves quite often. Well, one of those purposes is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Posterity meaning our kids and their kids and all the generations yet unborn. So it's not only the folks in the antechamber of the womb waiting to come into life. It's those who exist only in our imagination, to whom the Constitution says we have an obligation, because the aim of our government is not just to serve ourselves in this generation, but to secure the blessings of liberty for our posterity, those yet unborn. So when he says the Constitution doesn't address abortion, he's saying something that's, I'm sorry, it's quite inane. And I use that word literally. It's an inane statement. Oh yes, the word abortion doesn't occur in the Constitution. And I suppose because the word clone doesn't occur in the Constitution, we shall therefore pretend that we don't have to think through the moral obligations that we shall have to individuals who have been cloned from genes that were invented by or procured by research that was owned by some corporation that will then want to claim them as slaves. Are these people suggesting that we are thus become so foolish, so unintelligent, that we will not know how to take the concepts of justice that our Constitution requires in order to be understood and apply them with common sense and rationality to those circumstances which we shall encounter in the course of the 21st century and shall have to make judgments about? Shall we unleash every horror on humanity because this or that word is not mentioned in the Constitution, even when the concept of justice in the situation is clearly recognizable? Is that what Justice Scalia means to say? Because I think that that abandons reason. It abandons common sense. It abandons the obligation that we have to both. And it will end up destroying the possibility of constitutional government if we go on accepting this abdication of judiciousness from those who call themselves our justices.
Well, heavy, but absolutely case to point. Steve?
Well, Dr. Keyes made a great point, like he always does, but the Declaration and the Constitution go together. And the Declaration says we're given rights from God, and the first one mentioned is life. And so, in my opinion, you cannot be a Christian and support Barack Obama. You cannot be a Christian and support Planned Parenthood. It just doesn't, they don't go together. They're opposites of each other. And so this is a very, very, very sad story where two innocent people have lost their lives. And I can't imagine this young woman now standing before Jesus and with her child, and the child's wondering, well, what did I do wrong? Why did you get rid of me? Why did this happen? And the next point is that I don't understand why the majority of the black community still supports Barack Obama when the majority of the black community are devout Christians, and why are the black Christian ministers not raising a fit about these issues when they're the ones supposed to be explaining the message of God and Jesus to their communities, when it is in direct violation of Obama and abortion and Planned Parenthood, but yet they're destroying the black community. I don't understand that at all.
I must give credit to, there's a number of black pastors around the country that are standing up and saying about the gay marriage thing, marriage is between a man and a woman. Many of these, there's a black pro-life organizations, they're given no respect and no airtime.
And I want to add something just quickly. I don't want to imply that I'm talking about every black person in America. Dr. Keyes is a great example. Our guest last week, another example. But I'm just talking about it in generalities, and the majority of the community acts that way.
And that cannot be argued. I have family members, as most of you know. My wife is black, and so half of my family is black. My kids are mixed, and they literally are starving. The black wealth has been reduced by 90% since Barack Hussein Obama took over the presidency. And as they are starving, they're making excuses for Barack Obama and his policies. It just blows my mind, the lack of willingness. And we just had General Curry, who talked about his friend, Colin Powell, who wanted Barack Obama to be successful because he would have been the first and was the first, quote-unquote, black president, even though he's as much white as he is black, but he's as much black as he is white. But the reality is that now he has recognized he was made a fool of, and he will not back or vote for Barack Obama again. Now, Alan, I'm sure you're faced with this, friends and relatives and acquaintances and strangers, that this argument, how can a person put the skin pigment ahead of everything and anything else?
Well, see, I, Stan, have rejected from the get-go the notion that there was some kind of, I don't know, moral tie between Alan Keyes and Barack Obama. And I never understood black Americans who acted as if this man represented something particular about the heritage of the ethnic group. I'm not talking now about pigmentation. I'm talking about folks who share a common heritage that looks back through that heritage on a history that then created a common sense of what it means to suffer injustice, to struggle against that injustice, to come to understand in various ways the wherewithal that by God's grace we can have to fight against it. I'm talking about those folks. And I kept on telling people, all the media people and all these types, I don't know if they're racist, but they're racialists. They're people who actually accept the notion that skin color, physical pigmentation creates human groupings. And that's a lie. It doesn't. human communities are not created like species of animals on the basis of physical characteristics. They exist and have existed through all of human history as something that reflects ties that have an element of biology. Yes, indeed, they may, and family and other things, but that also fundamentally reflect the core truth of our nature, which is our moral capacity, our understanding in common of certain things that are right and good and true and beautiful, and that we can see in one another and in our community and in our experience, first perhaps within a family context, then within the context of cities and towns and villages, and finally nations, and eventually the earth itself. But it's that moral understanding that is the basis of community, not the incidents of the body and the physical junk that goes on. But they are all confined, and they thought, well, your skin color must mean that you are going to see something in common with Barack Obama. I tried to explain. He does not come from the same background that I do. I didn't particularly expect that someone who did not have to wrestle with the heritage in which he saw enslaved ancestors and identified with those who fought against the scourge that destroyed liberty for them and fought for the movements that eventually removed that scourge from them and fought for greater justice. I didn't expect him to identify with that because he's not part of it. His father, insofar as he had black pigmentation, was from Africa, identified with Islamic movements and with movements that in fact were dedicated to a kind of aristocratic repression of people, including the ideological rule by the few that's associated with communism and socialism. So I didn't see much in common with him, and I still don't. And sadly, on account of his ideological background, which embraces the idea that kind of empties humanity of its divine significance and instead talks in terms of physics and history and all this as if you can completely understand human affairs in those terms. That's where his background is. And so at the end of the day, killing babies, black or white, it's like pulverizing stones so that you can make cement, you know. That's all it is to these people. And that's all at the end of the day, for all the posturing they do, it is to them. That's why they could kill people by the tens of millions in their purges and their holocausts and so forth under whether it was the National Socialist regime of the Nazis or the Leninist Marxist socialist regimes of the communists in Russia and elsewhere. And that's why Barack Obama could go to Kenya and sup and give money to somebody who sent his minions out to slaughter people in the villages there when he didn't win an election. Because they've got an endless stomach for this kind of destruction of human life. And I didn't see anything in common with that in terms of the heritage of black Americans who were the victims of the kind of injustice that disregarded humanity and therefore ought to have nothing in common with people who are capable of that disregard on whatever excuse. So I've never bought it, Stan, and I don't see it. And I guess it's what emboldened me throughout and emboldens me now to speak staunchly and determinedly against Barack Obama and everything he stands for. But because I speak against everything he stands for, it's not about him personally or anything like that. It's about all the things he has said and done that align him with the forces that seek to destroy what I have come to understand to be the essential moral components of freedom and liberty and human dignity. He wants to destroy them and embraces the ideologies that would do so in a systematic way. And that's why I don't understand how folks who come from the same background I do would want to stand with somebody like that. And frankly, I'm not even listening to the Colin Powells of this world now. Well, they served themselves in their way, I suppose, but how could they have forgotten, with all the advantages of education and knowledge and so forth, to have succumbed to an essentially racist allegiance based on skin color to someone with whom they ought to have had nothing in common? I don't get it.
Well, I get it, but I understand not getting it because it defies logic. All right, we only have a couple minutes left. So I just want to go around the horn, start with you, Chief. When you combine what happened at Penn State, which we really haven't talked about, where they lowered the boom on this college program because they allowed a homosexual pedophile, but a homosexual who had sex with young men as well as younger people. He didn't have sex with babies. He had sex with 14 and 15 and 10 and 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds. A homosexual. No difference between him and any homosexual, in my opinion, other than he was in a position to coerce more. And they're outraged and doing all this craziness and destroying a program that didn't do any of these things, but simply didn't stop this guy, and sending a Monsignor to jail. At the same time, we're seeing a lunatic killing innocent people, emulating what is now the popular culture of violence and death, and somehow they're still not recognizing that what all that has led to, we're now still awarding and lauding with this gay marriage movement. Chief.
Well, the first thing, Dr. Keyes, I'm proud to know you, and in your last comments, you talked about the difference between you and Barack Obama and how you have nothing in common, and that's because you're a good man and he is not. That's really the issue. But what I want to say is that all of us have a duty to pick a side, and we have an obligation to do what's right and to support what's right. And for us to, as good people, as Christians, as Americans, as Jewish Americans, on the right side of God and freedom in this country, we have a duty to support God, we have a duty to support freedom, and we cannot be tolerant of anything that's going to damage that. And if we do, then we're on the wrong side, and we're going to answer for it eventually. But if we want to maintain freedom and liberty, we must be like you have just described, and be good people and support good things, and stick up and say things, and not sit back on our laurels and do nothing.
Alan, got 60 seconds.
Well, I can just wholeheartedly affirm that, and I think that we live in a time when it may seem to folks that gets to be more and more difficult. But I would say simply pray, hold on to God, hold on to your understanding of that liberty which has come to us clearly from our heritage. And I think that He will help us to find the clear path that in the end can lead to the restoration of the integrity of our way of life, but not if we give up on it because we've reached this moment of confusion and difficulty. And I think in that respect, the terrible events that we endure could help to clarify for us the truth of our affirmation of those principles that allow us to recognize not only what's terrible in them, but the fact that a return to God and our allegiance to the understanding that comports with His will is really the positive answer. It's not just a question of reacting against the specter of violence and evil, but of restoring our allegiance to that which has, from the beginning of America's life, acknowledged that God is the source of our right and justice, and that willingness to conform our way to God's way is what in the end marks out the path of this nation's better destiny.
Well said, my friend, and I'll just summarize it this way. It is never right to do wrong. It is never wrong to do right, and right and wrong are defined in the Bible. Not in the Quran, not in any place else. It's in the Bible. Good night, America. Thank you, Dr. Keyes. Thank you, Chief Steve.